BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Thursday, and this episode is going to be a little bit different. As you can see from the title, this is a serial killer AMA, that's an Ask Me Anything. Normally on Thursdays, I've been doing an episode on the disappearance of Donna Lass, a deep dive podcast segment about her disappearance and most likely a murder. I strongly suggest foul play in the disappearance of Donna Lass from September 6th of 1970. There will be one that will come out next week about Donna Lass on Thursday. This episode is going to be a bunch of things thrown together because last Tuesday I did not do the regularly scheduled True Crime Talk radio, and I decided to devote a large amount of time for Jack the Ripper questions. And we just passed the anniversary of the death of Polly Nichols, who was the first victim in the Ripper canonical crime. So Tuesday was a day of tribute to her, and there was no episode that came out, no new one anyway. And then on Wednesday, I decided to devote the entire AMA to Ripper questions. I love doing the AMAs. I love responding to the questions and comments, but what it really comes down to is that I had to decide, do I want to have these things that are just kind of jumping all over the map, or did I want to make AMAs about one single subject? And the fact of the matter is, these are some of my favorite episodes where I get to respond to your questions and comments about all kinds of subjects, so I'm just going to keep doing them. And they might not be the most popular episodes on the channel, but let's just see what happens. To begin, we have a question and comment from Irish Brummy01, who has some things to say about Manny Grossman, the YouTuber, and Thomas Henry Horn, the host of the Stones Unturned podcast, in their recent dispute over plagiarism. Irish Brummy01 writes, I would classify myself as a Horn fan. I'm starting to lean in favor of the myth theory. I bought Thomas Henry Horn's book, but he needs to learn that when you put forward a theory and people subscribe to that and expand upon that, that's not plagiarism. It's support. He should be flattered that his theory has taken hold, but no, he takes the attitude that it's his. I could follow that type of thinking, except with Manny Grossman and Thomas Horn, there is a different type of dispute that's going on. One time on Thomas Horn's show, I think it was actually on the Professor Dad channel, not the Stones Unturned, he said Manny Grossman is a good YouTuber, but he borrows a lot. I didn't bat an eyelash. I didn't think about that. Well, what does that mean? Then in a previous episode, one that came out after that one, I should say, maybe let's just say the following episode, he said something to the effect of, and don't quote me on the number, but he's like, Manny Grossman's a great YouTuber, but 40% of his material is taken from the Stones Unturned podcast, and Manny heavily disputes that, and I heavily dispute that. I don't think that's true. I don't think that Manny has taken anything of any particular episode that I can think of and put it onto his channel. I mean, we're talking about the information, that is. So I think that's all I have to say, and I've talked about this in a couple other episodes. I just wanted to put that one out in the beginning. And speaking of beginnings, I would like to remind you guys that you can download this show for free at LaunchPad 1. There's a link to it in the description box. It's under the same name, BlackBoxOnlineRadio, but the easiest way to find it is just in the description box. You can download the audio as a pure podcast, take it on the go, anywhere and anyhow. Another great way to support the show is by going over to Amazon.com and looking at the book Killer on a White Horse by me, Ned DeHaan. It's a novel murder mystery. And before I go any further into the episode, I was corresponding with Soren Korsgaard, who is the author of the book America's Jack the Ripper, and I'm hopefully going to be doing a book discussion about his book in the near future. And I was looking for a very particular comment that someone had once posted on the channel. I have one episode out about Soren Kierkegaard's material responding to the YouTube videos he created for his book, America's Jack the Ripper. But I haven't read the book yet, and I'm hoping to do that soon. But when I did that one video, someone left a comment on a different video out of place. It was just an open letter that had been published on my channel to Soren Kierkegaard, and I was like, I don't know why you're sending me this. I don't know why you're putting out this. Hey, Soren Kierkegaard, you're a Dane living in Germany, and I have this to say about your Zodiac theories. And I was just like, I'm not sure what to make of this. But anyway, while I was looking for that particular comment, I found an old manuscript that I had written back in 2010. I thought that this thing was gone, lost to time. I thought that the only file of this manuscript that I had written was rotting in the gutter in Moscow, and I'm not even joking. But yeah, I found a novel that I had written in the past, and there's a reason why I'm telling you guys this, because a lot of people have been asking me the question after I put out the novel Killer on a White Horse, are you going to write a book about the Zodiac Killer? Because they think that there are some things on this channel that could be expanded upon and put into a book. And I was sitting at the dinner table a couple days ago, just sitting by myself eating a quesadilla, and then all of a sudden, it's like some type of dots were connected, and you have that light bulb moment, and I suddenly began to understand things in a different way, and not exclusively Zodiac Killer, but serial killer related. Yes, the Zodiac would be a big section of it, but I had this new idea for a book that could build upon a lot of the old material, and something that I'm doing that is a little bit selfish, I have made some new observations about the Zodiac Killer mystery that I haven't revealed yet because I wasn't sure what to do with them. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I have this new idea for a book. And then I found my old manuscript. But the problem is, that one was intended to be partnered with another type of short story, and they were going to be put together. Like back in 2010, 11, and 12, I had wanted to do that. You know, like have like 2 or 3 short novellas put together into one book. And now I'm actually able to complete that project. So part of me is like, gotta go through the to-do list, the checklist, and I think that that might be something that I would do first. Then, at some point in the future, maybe I'll sit down and write out this serial killer book that's going to talk not only about the Zodiac Killer, as I said, about many different things. So please look out for many things in the future, and as always, you can like and subscribe, and you can even visit the Teespring page, have a look at some of the t-shirts, coffee mugs, merchandise, all of that stuff is in the description box, and remember, being weird is not a crime. Our next comment is from Shropshire on the episode Serial Killer John Aykroyd, The Ghost of Highway 20. John Arthur Aykroyd was a serial killer that operated in Oregon. He would lure his victims into his vehicle on said Highway 20, and then he would murder them. One of them survived, but the interesting thing about John Arthur Aykroyd is that he was only convicted of one murder. I believe it's the murder of Kay Turner, and he seems almost certainly guilty in other crimes, though. So the comment is from Shropshire, who says, this is just one stretch of U.S. Highway 20 in Oregon. How about all the women who are indigenous in British Columbia off of Highway 16 and Highway 79? Actually, it says 16/79, and all those who have perished in unsolved mysteries. Oh, absolutely, I've talked about what you're referring to. That is the Highway of Tears. You see, in Western Canada, the cities are very far apart, the transportation centers are not well connected, people are also always short of funds, so a common way of navigating the Highway of Tears, as it has sadly been named, is to hitchhike. And the episode that I did discussing this material was on the death of Amber Tuckerow. The reason why Amber Tuckerow's case became so famous is because there was a voicemail that had been saved. I believe she actually called her brother, who was in prison, and the call went to voicemail, and because the prison records all incoming calls, so they had a very lengthy conversation with somebody in a truck who says he's driving her to Edmonton, Alberta, and he's going to go in the back way into the city through 50th Street. But Amber Tuckerow was found dead, murdered. But the reason why the Highway of Tears is become a popular dumping ground, and most likely, almost certainly, multiple serial killers are operating that stretch of Canada, is because it's secluded, and people are resorting to hitchhiking to move around. And one of the absolute most saddening and disturbing things about it, they say the soil there is very soft and gentle, and it's easy to pick up with a shovel. Absolutely disgusting. Hot Rock Nation has left a comment on the episode Zodiac Ross Sullivan Debunked. Oh yeah, by the way, I've been doing a debunking series on the weekend talking about some suspects that I certainly do not believe were the Zodiac killer, to the best of my knowledge. Ross Sullivan was the first one, and Hot Rock Nation says, okay, I'll try to debunk some of your debunk points. Point 1. You say a schizophrenic can't plan, but that is absolutely incorrect, as James Holmes was the Batman movie shooter displayed with shooting and bombs set up at his place. Point 2. You say that the Zodiac was in control and Ross Sullivan was not because he ran around nude and trapped a man in a phone booth. First off, the Zodiac talked about how he struggled with control like it was a battle within himself. Secondly, the Zodiac showed many signs of being narcissistic, which an attention-getting act of running around naked, sorry if I laughed at that, and trapping someone in a phone booth would fall under. Can I just pause for a second? You say that he is too tall, but most witness identifications either looked at the Zodiac from the ground or from a building down, not standing directly in front of him, seeing him eye to eye. You say that he is too big. You can't always guess a person's weight just by looking at them, and who carries their weight. Well, 300 pounds or 200. It's high, but look much less. You talk about the boot prints in the ground, show that the killer was around 220 pounds, at least. The key thing here is how far your shoes or boots would sink into the ground and is based on the hardness of the ground when standing upon it. Alright, now normally I probably wouldn't even respond to this one because I don't think that Ross Sullivan was the Zodiac killer, and I did a whole episode on that, the debunking one, right? But because it says I'll try to debunk some of your debunk points, well now I'm going to try to debunk some of your debunking of my debunking, just because I wanted to say that sentence. Point number 1. You say that a schizophrenic can't plan, but that's absolutely incorrect, as James Holmes was the Batman movie shooter, and he was good at planning. I don't think I ever said that a schizophrenic can't plan. Definitely a schizophrenic would have less control over his mental faculties. No, absolutely not. I didn't say a schizophrenic can't plan. Look at Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. But here's something that I wanted to say to Hot Rock Nation. Your example, James Holmes, he was a mass shooter, not a serial killer. And I think that's very telling. That's something that would be more typical of someone who would be a schizophrenic, that impulsive, not willing to wait, doing something that is a one-off experience as opposed to a cold, methodical, and calculating set of crimes. I have a 3-part series on James Holmes here on this channel, so I can tell you that yes, he contemplated becoming a serial killer, but he thought that it wouldn't bring enough destruction into the world, and I don't mean to make light of anything. But yeah, James Holmes wasn't even a serial killer, so that falls into I mean that's kind of a moot point. But yes, of course a schizophrenic can plan, but I would just ask you that question. Will a schizophrenic have more or less control of their mental faculties? Absolutely less, and we're going to explore some of that later on. Point 2, you say that the Zodiac was in control and Sullivan was not because he ran around nude. First off, the Zodiac talked about how he struggled with control like a battle within himself. That's a battle with internal control, not external. I believe the Zodiac was saying stuff like, oh, there's this thing inside of me that's driving me to kill. Not, I'm running around naked and I'm gonna trap a man in a phone booth. Internal versus external. You say he is too tall? Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've just proved that point. There are no witness sightings of someone who is 6'2", like Sullivan. And you say that the boot prints in Lake Berryessa depend on how hard the ground was, like to determine whether or not someone was 200 pounds or 300 pounds. I don't believe that's true. I think that is just an incorrect statement. That I mean, what he's talking about is I made a comment in the video about how the footprints at Lake Berryessa were estimated to weigh 200 they were estimated to have come from someone who weighs 200 to 220 pounds, and in 1969, Ross Sullivan was estimated to have weighed 300 pounds. So, also, we do not have any witness sightings of someone who weighed 300 pounds. Most people expect that the Zodiac Killer was much closer to 200 pounds. I think Ross Sullivan is too big to be the Zodiac Killer. Now, here's something to you. Michael Morford responded to that same episode about my debunking of Ross Sullivan, and he tackled an absolutely different aspect of the case, and that was locations. I mean, yeah, we can argue all day. Did some guy weigh 200 or 217 pounds or something like that? We can't go back in time and put Ross on a scale now, can we? But what Mike Morford said was, you made a comment in your debunking video about Ross Sullivan that he was in Santa Cruz in 1969, not San Francisco. Mike Morford says that he can definitively place Ross Sullivan in San Francisco. However, he has moved on from Sullivan, and he now, of course, thinks that the Zodiac Killer is McDuff. But the person who made the casts of the footprints at Lake Berryessa that I was just talking about was none other than Harold K. Snook, also known as Hal Snook. And I just wanted to share some things about Hal Snook because I was online just reading up on some stuff, and I found that Hal Snook was actually mentioned in a book called Napa Valley Lawman, and there was a chapter dedicated to him. This is absolutely not related to the Zodiac Killer. It's talking about Hal Snook as a forensic scientist. It was a very short chapter. I mean, perhaps we could even call it a section instead of a chapter, but it showed Hal Snook at working as a forensic scientist, and I wanted to share some of those photos and the material, and invite anyone else to just have a look. You can even read through some of it on Google Books here for free. And the full title of the book is Napa Valley Lawmen and Outlaws by Todd L. Schulman, Shulman, Todd L. Schulman, Napa Valley Lawmen and Outlaws. And I would like to go to our next question, which actually came in via email while we're talking about the Zodiac Killer. I'll stay on this serial killer point. And this is from Andrew, who sent this in to the email address blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. Anybody can do the same. And the question is, any idea why the sender of the Paul Stein letter, if not the killer, chose to obtain and send a piece of the victim's shirt if they had undisclosed information to offer? I mean, that's a brilliant question. In the first Zodiac letter, the Zodiac says, I will state some facts that only I and the police know, and then he lists off the facts. The boy at Lake Herman Road, who we now know, of course, is David Faraday, had his feet facing the car. I'll state some facts about the girl in the 4th of July. She was wearing patterned slacks, and so on, even though she was wearing a slack dress, but that's what the Zodiac wrote in the letter. Well, obviously, if the person who murdered Paul Stein wrote the letter that contained a piece of Paul Stein's shirt, why go to that length of cutting off Paul Stein's shirt at all when he could have just said, okay, I'm going to say some facts that only I and the police know? Well, I think I can answer that. Number one, there's a theory out there that Lake Berryessa is a copycat. I don't subscribe to that theory, but the previous Zodiac incident, Lake Berryessa, which occurred on September 27th of 1969, maybe was not the Zodiac Killer. That was someone who learned about it from the papers. And then the Zodiac wanted to prove to everybody that, yes, indeed, he murdered Paul Stein. That's why he cut off the piece of the shirt. And he took credit for Lake Berryessa only by saying, I am the murderer of the taxi driver and the 2 kids by the North Bay. Something to that effect, though. I think I'm paraphrasing a little bit too much, but you get the idea. I don't agree with that theory because I think the Zodiac wrote the message on the car door at Lake Berryessa in substitution of a letter. He wrote that instead of sending in a letter immediately after the Lake Berryessa stabbing. Not to mention, there is a phone call. But also, I've been talking a lot about Jack the Ripper recently, and Jack the Ripper cut out the organs of his victims. And I've said it once, and I'll say it again. I think the Zodiac Killer is a cheap 20th century Jack the Ripper knockoff. And perhaps whoever murdered Paul Stein was emulating Jack the Ripper. And he wanted to not cut out his kidney or something like that. So he cut off a piece of his shirt because it was less gruesome, less time-consuming, less likely to get caught, but it was paying homage to Jack the Ripper. After the third and fourth Ripper crimes, which happened in the double event, that's the murders of Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes, there's that message that's written on a wall, and after the third Zodiac crime, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, which was almost a double event, then there is a message written on the car door because they're at Lake Berryessa and there are no walls around. I absolutely, in every fiber of my being, believe that whoever came up with the Zodiac killer idea, persona, set of murders was someone who was emulating Jack the Ripper to some extent. Now, the piece of Paul Stein's shirt, maybe that's like a less, a less gruesome way of going about it, or maybe it's something totally different. Next question from Andrew. Wouldn't it have been easier and less risky to prove involvement with written information than breaking into an evidence locker? Oh, yes, well, that's related to the hoax theory. I'll read another sentence. He says, "Hi, Ned, I appreciate the Zodiac hoax theory is difficult to disprove, but I don't believe for a minute. But I get a lot of listening to Horan and Evan because they have spent a lot of time with the reports. I think that's true as well. Then let's read the question again for fun. Wouldn't it have been easier and less risky to prove involvement with written information than breaking into the locked evidence room? I think we could still answer that with that previous example about Jack the Ripper. They wanted to pay homage to him, or they're trying to make the whoever came up with the Zodiac persona is trying to show something to the Ripper. Oh yeah, but I almost forgot something very valuable. That could have a clue of literary significance. Why did the Zodiac send in a piece of Paul Stein's shirt instead of just saying, "Oh yeah, I murdered this taxi driver. Now I'll state some facts that only I and the police know. He was wearing this colored shirt. He had this type of ring on his finger, and he had this driver's license number of such and such because the Zodiac has Paul Stein's wallet." So why not just do that? Well, it could have been a clue from literature. The channel Skating Crow Productions talked a lot about how the murder of Paul Stein could have been influenced by T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, particularly the line, "leaving a taxi throbbing and waiting." So there may have been, even if it's not The Wasteland by Eliot, there could be another clue from some book or movie or TV show that inspired him to cut the piece of the shirt. And then let's go on to the next one here. And by the way, this is not exclusively serial killer related, this is just in the true crime world. Aaron Stoner has put out a new video on the disappearance of Steven Kosher, and I think that his videos are absolutely excellent. He was the guy whom I first mentioned on the channel because he found a forensic artist to create the composite sketch of a suspect in the murder of Missy Beavers. I also learned about a new case from Aaron called The Murder of Elijah Wood, or it was The Murder of Elijah Wood. You might see it referred to as the racetrack murder. Track is spelled T-R-A-C. Elijah Wood was working in a gas station, and somebody just walked in, shot him, and then walked out, and they had one of those videos where they couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. I strongly believe that it was a man who murdered Elijah Wood, and the good thing about Aaron's coverage of that was he was even pointing out that the type of gloves that were worn by this individual were battle gloves from football, like the kind that a wide receiver would wear, and the perpetrator was very tall and very thin, so perhaps it was a wide receiver. But when I was on the Lorden Arts channel, they in the recent update they were just saying, or John Lorden, the host, was saying that the authorities are still unclear on whether or not it was a man or a woman who shot Elijah Wood. With the disappearance of Steven Kosher, Aaron has been on the ground, and I mean that literally, searching the areas where Steven Kosher may have disappeared. And the most recent video that he put out was looking for a very particular piece of Steven Kosher's past, and it was his cell phone, actually. It was called Steven Kosher Case Update 2021, No Stone Unturned. I would invite you guys to listen to that. Now, I have a question here that is only halfway serial killer related, and it is from Ray Grant, who is the author of the book Zodiac Killer Solved, and he says, "Hey, superstar, why'd you block me on Reddit, LOL?" Firstly, I hope you're referring to me. I mean, I don't know who else you'd be talking to. No, but about Reddit, I've never blocked anyone on Reddit. I don't even think I have a Reddit page. I don't post there, so that really isn't my territory. Yeah, I'm not sure why or how, if you mean the site blocked you, or that somebody who has a similar name, perhaps Ned Stark or Ned Flanders or something like that, blocked you on Reddit. But no, that wasn't me. I don't use Reddit. I have no connection to it. Ray Grant, though, did send me a copy of his book Zodiac Killer Solved, and I have been reading it. I'm loving it, actually, so please look out for next week's Zodiac Mondays. And we're going to switch gears for the next segment here on the channel. Recently I was talking about the book When in French by Lauren Collins on, I believe it was on the True Crime Talk Radio episode that came out a couple weeks ago, and I was discussing that because even though it's not a true crime book, she still covered the death of Edouard Stern, somebody from the French-speaking part of Europe, but she also said something on a lighter note about being married to a man from France who didn't speak English well was like living with Andy Kaufman's Foreign Man, which was just a comedy bit that was done by the comedian Andy Kaufman. And I happened to encounter an interview that Andy Kaufman had done with Orson Welles, nonetheless, the legendary film director and radio broadcaster. It was on one of those old late-night shows, but Orson Welles wasn't the regular host. He was a fill-in, like he was a guest host on the program. And I highly recommend you guys watch this because it was one of the few times when you could actually see the comedian Andy Kaufman being very calm, being very responsive, directly answering questions, not even trying to be extremely silly about any of the material. And some people made this observation, which I happen to agree with, that you could tell he had a lot of respect for Orson Welles because of everything that Welles had done with cinema, as well as broadcasting, of course, Citizen Kane, War of the Worlds, and so on. But when it comes to the comedian Andy Kaufman, I once asked somebody about him. I said, what do you think of the comedian Andy Kaufman? And he said, he was a paranoid schizophrenic. And I have to disagree with that. I'm certainly not a doctor, and Andy Kaufman has passed away. We can't have any type of examinations performed on him. I wouldn't want to if he were still alive. But watching him in that Orson Welles interview, based on how easily he could control himself when he wanted to focus and behave in a certain way, he could. And I read this on the internet ages ago, a great place to get all of your wonderful insights into the world. The internet. Which source was it? I don't remember, but it was on the internet. And it said, the difference between a mental illness and a bad habit is, with a bad habit, you are able to stop when you choose to, when you want to, when you're capable of it. Like, say, for example, the behavior that a schizophrenic would experience. Like, if someone, well, they can't stop. They can't just turn off that part of their brain, or if they really concentrate and try really hard, then it's just going to go away. So no, I don't think Andy Kaufman was a paranoid schizophrenic. I think the behaviors that that person was talking about that made him respond that way, meaning, like, the reason why he said he thinks Andy Kaufman was a paranoid schizophrenic is that, well, Andy Kaufman told us in one of his own performances, he said the audience would always laugh at the things he didn't want them to laugh at, so he just started doing different types of behaviors, and people were still laughing, and then he would keep going with it. So he'll do weird and unconventional things, but people will keep laughing at it. Like, sometimes he will just look in an obscure direction and people would start laughing, and he even has a video which you can see on YouTube of just eating ice cream, and that's like the whole act, and then people are still laughing about it. So he knew how to generate laughter in some unconventional ways. Now, that's definitely dopamine-centered living, but definitely not at the extreme levels of what someone would experience in terms of psychosis. So I would like to use that as an introduction into a bigger discussion, because I have to give a shout out to Anna Lissette, who left this comment. A theory in neurobiology is that double genes for schizophrenia equal a terrible and debilitating illness. Half those genes equals schizotypal personality, and those individuals become shamans, religious leaders, and other creative types within populations. Schizophrenia is so devastating that it would have been selected out of the human population, except the schizotypal personality has been valued throughout history. This is the work of Dr. Robert Sapolsky from Stanford University. His lecture is on YouTube. Well, Anna Lisette, you knew I couldn't resist that. And I did watch that lecture. I listened to it, actually. It was rather lengthy, and you know how there just aren't enough hours in the day? I had to listen to that one while I was driving. I have YouTube Premium. It is one of the best investments I've ever made. I can download shows and just listen to them while I'm out in the car. I think it was 2 trips, like driving out and driving back. It took about 2 hours worth of driving to get through that lecture, if I recall. But I'm glad I made it to the end. So my takeaways from that, learning about schizophrenia from Dr. Robert Sapolsky, is I'm going to do something on this channel that I don't do nearly enough. And that is, I'm going to admit that I was wrong. Halfway. Completely wrong? No, never. But I was halfway wrong about something. In a recent episode, I said that if somebody were a schizophrenic, then they need a pre-existing mental condition. That's stuff that Anna Lisette was just talking about. Something's in the genes, right? Like, meaning that your environment, your behaviors, the surroundings around you, the people in your life, the experiences that you have, that doesn't just create schizophrenia. Like if someone has a rough childhood, they don't immediately grow up to become a schizophrenic. There has to be something genetic and or an issue with their brain functioning, like, as we said, neurochemistry, or actually the interactions between the other compartments of the brain, which I call neurological functioning. That has to also be present. Well, I definitely don't think I gave environment enough credit. As I said, I was halfway wrong, because Robert Sapolsky introduced his lecture by saying that usually it is the environment that brings the schizophrenia to the surface, or that people become aware of someone's schizophrenic tendencies because of traumatic experiences in life, or because of certain behaviors in life. Meaning, like, even someone is going to be in a car accident when they're a teenager, or maybe someone is in an abusive relationship in the later part of adolescence. So things like that can awaken these schizophrenic traits. And so I definitely didn't give that credence, or give that credit, rather. But I also think that he is in favor of how there does have to be something pre-existing. It's not only the environment. It was a widely held belief, so says that lecture, that in the 1950s and 60s, people thought that it was purely environmental, that schizophrenia was just something that happened because of the way parents acted toward children, or somebody's upbringing created this. Now, how does this relate to serial killers? Well, a lot of it is about brain chemistry and neurological functioning, and that same lecture by Sapolsky also talks about how there's this thing called the dopamine hypothesis, that if someone is a psychotic, their brain is producing too much dopamine. And I even have an episode on this channel called The Brain of the Serial Killer, where I talk about that exact same thing. One of the key functions of antipsychotic medication is that it reduces the amount of dopamine in somebody's brain. And you might be thinking, well, what about all these people who say, hey, I got notifications? That's dopamine. I feel good because somebody liked my photo. That's dopamine. Well, Rollo Tomassi, who's the author of the book The Rational Male in Preventive Medicine, says that he just wants to drill this into us, that is not dopamine that makes you feel good. Dopamine is about excitement, in terms of your brain gets overwhelmed with something. That pleasant feeling is the second part. Those are endorphins. Dopamine is the precursor to endorphins, but dopamine is mostly about having your system overpowered, to paraphrase Tomassi. And I think you can get the idea. But one of the more fascinating parts of the lecture by Sapolsky, other than me being halfway wrong, was that he went to Africa and he was living with some indigenous villagers, And, I mean, I really sound like they were somewhat advanced for indigenous villagers, but on the other hand, in some ways they were more primitive than the rest of civilization. And they needed to examine a woman whom was thought to have had schizophrenia. And they're like, well, why do they think that she has any type of mental illness? And they said it was because she had killed a goat. And they're like, what? Well, people kill goats? I mean, where does meat come from? Well, she bit the goat on the neck and she was drinking the goat's blood and she was hearing voices. And he asked this question, what is the difference between that type of behavior and other types of behavior? Because maybe you're listening to my voice right now. I mean, I'd hope you are. I mean, unless you're one of those people who has muted this thing and you're just watching the wonderful images, that's fine if you want to do that. It's just kind of different. But, like, what really is going on there? Like, what is the difference between killing a goat the way she did, hearing the voices and drinking the goat's blood from the neck, versus killing a goat in a slaughterhouse? I mean, goat isn't very popular in America, but it definitely does exist. I ate a goat stew once at an African restaurant near the D.C. area recently. By recently, I mean 11 years ago. Time is relative. Anyway, his answer was, it's because she was doing those behaviors at the wrong time. And I wish he hadn't said that, because this is one of the major problems with psychiatry. It is that, first, you have to accept a very narrow definition of normal. Second, you have to accept a very narrow definition of good and bad. Third, you have to accept a very narrow definition of right and wrong. And those things are not proven by science nor psychiatry, absolutely not. Those are instead solved in some other way, whether it's philosophy or spirituality, determining what is immoral or moral or amoral, not by medical science. And in many ways, I thought that was an inappropriate way to address the subject, because a better way to deal with it is, well, if she's hearing voices, number one, are they auditory hallucinations, or is this just some kind of internal way that she's thinking? If she's actually hearing the physical sound of the voice that shouldn't be there, well, then that's an auditory hallucination, which is a key sign of schizophrenia. And it's something that's created in the mind that appears to be equivalent to something that is external. Like, the internal parts of the brain are recreating the external world in an inappropriate way. And these are some big warning signs of people who have schizophrenia, and it usually develops in the adolescents, late teens, and around the age of 18 to 22. And then what thing Sapolsky said was that after the age of 30, there's a very low chance that someone will become a schizophrenic. And I was just like, ha, elementary guidance school counselor, you can suck it. I'm 33 and I didn't become schizophrenic. You were wrong, jerk. But that's a story for another time. And I think that he was trying to point out that this woman is hearing voices at the wrong time. She's killing the goat at the wrong time. She's behaving in a wrong way. That language always bothers me. How about she thinks she's hearing voices, or maybe she's actually hearing the sound of a voice when there's just no voice actually there? How about she lost awareness of her mental faculties to the point where she's drinking goat's blood from the neck? She just bit into the neck of a goat and killed it. She has the inability to differentiate between abstractions in her own mind and the external world. And somebody like Andy Kaufman, it's totally different, because I don't think that there's an ounce of him being unable to differentiate between all of these types of behaviors. Instead, he's being unconventional, and this is heavily tied into dopamine as well. This is what dopamine-centered living is all about. And Dr. Jordan Peterson has talked a lot about this. And one of his little sound bites that has always stayed with me is that There is a dopamine surge that comes from unconventional behavior, and it can get greatly exacerbated by alcohol consumption. That's why drunk people get so silly. That's why people get silly, period, though. It's because it feels good. I mean, if it felt absolutely painful to be unconventional, I don't think people would do that. No, it makes people feel good. But you ever notice how some people really get off on silly behavior and other people do not? Well, that's because there are different components of brain chemistry. I frequently talk about Dr. Helen Fisher in The Anatomy of Love. I absolutely hope you guys will read that because it's life-changing. The four governing components of brain chemistry are dopamine, serotonin, testosterone, and estrogen. Serotonin is more about pleasant feelings that come from social situations, and dopamine is more about your own individual excitement. Remember what I said before about dopamine versus endorphin, though? And this dopamine surge that comes from unconventional behavior is all about being weird makes you feel good. Being weird is not a crime, but apparently it fuels your excitement, is so to speak. So, yeah, some guy like Andy Kaufman is going down that pathway, but he isn't down the pathway to the point where he is actually a schizophrenic. I'm a dopamine-centered person, and as of now, I don't believe I am a schizophrenic. Almost certainly not, because I'm past the cutoff age. Yay. No, there's no cutoff age. I mean, there are always medical exceptions. People are going to develop schizophrenia in their 30s and so on. Just the way that Sapolsky addressed it, he made it seem like it was very rare. There was also an interesting part of that lecture that was on how different drugs affect the brain, right? Like ecstasy will target the endorphins, but then you have things like psilocybin or even PCP, that is going to target the serotonin system, because remember, dopamine and then endorphin, and then serotonin is what gets amplified by the by psilocybin. So, I mean, it's just like, it's interesting to see how people get high in different ways. But on this notion of how society accepts this type of behavior, one point that Sapolsky absolutely declined, and I think he was right to do so, is that being schizophrenic does not help anybody's creativity. I mean, there's some people that think that it was a gift of humanity or something, or it's just a new way of thinking, and that somebody is approaching this in a welcoming way to schizophrenia, and perhaps some of what analyst that was talking about, it is even welcomed into society, or they find value in these types of behaviors. I mean, I certainly don't think that. And if you'd like to see kind of like a biodocudrama on this, is not docu, but a biodrama, then I would recommend I Know This Much Is True with Mark Ruffalo. He recently won the Golden Globe for it last year. He plays two twin brothers, like he plays both parts, and one of them has schizophrenia and the other doesn't. But it shows like the lifelong journey of somebody with schizophrenia. Dramatization. I should never have said docudrama because I don't believe, well, it's not based on a true story, but it's a dramatization of that story. And some other points that were brought up are a little bit saddening, because he's saying that a schizophrenic is someone who had an extremely overactive imagination as a kid. And I'll just ask you, did you have an overactive imagination as a kid? I mean, doesn't it always just seem like when people are talking about mental illnesses or the signs of being a serial killer even, and you're like, hey, wait a second, that's exactly like me. I mean, I absolutely had an overactive imagination. I was always looking out the window. I even had this one fourth grade teacher who just said, I'm never going to put you near a window again. And I was like, I'm looking out the window because your class is boring and you're a jerk. So, I mean, that's just really the long story short, and a lot of people do not take kindly to certain types of behaviors, and then it's just a big back and forth, and that's why overly tyrannical behavior isn't very good to have for, well, anybody. I mean, yes, okay, you need rules and such, but tyrannical behavior, then it just turns into this back and forth system. I mean, someone is angry because you're behaving in a certain way, and then you keep doing it because you don't believe that your way is bad. Who are you to tell me I can't look out a window or something? So I'm just going to keep doing it because I believe it's good. Then the teacher gets angry, so the lessons don't get more interesting because they're just focusing on trying to control everybody as opposed to do anything in regards to actual teaching. And it goes on and on and on. I mean, like, those types of behaviors don't only happen in the classroom, they also happen in relationships, they also happen in the workplace. Like, someone feels that they don't have to change, so then they just keep doing the same thing. Both people are doing that. Both parties are refusing to change, so the situation gets worse and worse and worse. And with, when it comes to mental conditions and so on, as Sapolsky said, traumatic experiences are very, very influential on how people's mental states are affected, to the point when it can actually awaken the dormant schizophrenic tendencies. But he also said something very interesting about the way a schizophrenic would process things that are earthly. And because they have this inability to differentiate between the abstractions of their own mind, they will often give very concrete answers to questions. Like, if you say, what's the similarity or commonality among a banana, an orange, and an apple? And a typical answer from a schizophrenic would be, they are all polysyllabic words. And, yeah, okay, that's true. Apple, orange, and banana. But, instead of saying something very simple like, well, they're all fruits, it's just immediately they go for the concrete, because when they're interacting with other people and they have the awareness of that, then that leads them away from abstraction, because abstractions are also one and the same many a time for schizophrenics. But Sapolsky asked a question in his lecture: are schizophrenics immediately dangerous to other people? Paraphrasing, of course, and I could answer that very easily. I was like, no, absolutely not. Some people are catatonic schizophrenics, and they can barely move at all. It's almost like their bodies are in this type of frozen. And in the true crime world, many criminals are schizophrenic, and they often do things that are very impulsive, I've found, as opposed to cold, methodical, and calculating. One example of a paranoid schizophrenic, or close to a paranoid schizophrenic, is Ted Kaczynski the Unabomber. And I think he is a very extreme case of someone who was very methodical and almost very aware of things, even though that he was schizophrenic. Now, he was given a provisional diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, meaning that the examinations were interrupted, but the psychiatrist was leaning that way, and I cite Mark Hewitt as a source for this. But, I mean, with the crimes of the Unabomber, very methodical, very cold and calculating, whereas last time, or I guess actually at the beginning, I was talking more about James Holmes, and he was someone who had the opportunity to choose something cold, methodical, and calculating, but instead he went for the immediate surge of committing a mass shooting. And that almost shows impulse control and the inability to differentiate between resisting that type of urge or impulse. So I guess my biggest problem with the entire package is that whole just making the assumption that right and wrong exist, and then trying to just using that as like kind of a false pillar of support in their life. Alright, and that's going to wrap things up for us here. So, I would always like to remind you guys that you can go over to Amazon.com, check out the book Killer on a White Horse. You can visit the Teespring page, have a look at some of the merchandise. And anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. And of course, BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for that bonus podcast that I'm always sharing with you guys. And I will see you over there on Instagram. Until next time.